Good afternoon. How are y'all doing? Good. Glad to see all of you here today for a really important conversation, I believe. Welcome to Millsaps. I'm Kenneth Townsend. I work here at Millsaps for the president of the college, Rob Perrigan, who's right there, and also as a professor in the political science department. And given the topic of today's conversation, I feel like I should also note that I'm a proud graduate of Mississippi Public Schools. So, yeah. We're really glad to have y'all here today. Today's discussion is the latest in a series of conversations that we have held here at the college regarding public education in Mississippi. The conversations began about 2.5 years ago when a crowd gathered in this very room to reflect on and to celebrate the Education Reform Act of 1982, and also to discuss some of the ongoing challenges related to public education in Mississippi. Governor Winter, who is with us here today, stood at this very podium and reminded us of our ongoing responsibility to leave this state and this world a little bit better than we found it. He inspired me and others here at Millsaps to live up to our legacy as, in Governor Winter's words, an intellectual oasis, a place where conventional wisdom is questioned, where ideas are debated, and where theory and action connect, all guided by a commitment to the public good. Today's conversation is made possible in part because of the generosity of two people who were in the audience that day in November 2012. Stirred by Governor Winter's words, following that panel, two generous alumni made an anonymous gift to establish the Elise and William Winter Speaker Series here at Millsaps. And Millsaps is deeply grateful to the donors for establishing this fund that will help us ensure continued success of our public forums and that will reinforce a key element of our strategic plan across the street and around the globe, partnerships and influence at Millsaps College. We at Millsaps believe that we have the opportunity and the responsibility to bring important topics and speakers to the public's attention, to be a public square of sorts. And we're especially pleased and honored to be linked with the names of Elise and William Winter through this gift to the Community Foundation. One of the first public forums supported by the Winter Series took place a year ago this month, and some of you were present for that conversation. It included a group of activists, policy experts, and lawmakers who shared with us, the audience, the history and context of public education funding in Mississippi. Today, we continue that conversation, but we'll focus our attention a little more specifically on some of the particular responses to underfunding of Mississippi's education program. One need not be a news junkie political science professor like me to know that there are a few topics that are more timely or important to our state. And to be sure, these debates raise questions that have both theoretical and practical relevance. For example, how much money is really needed to fund public education in Mississippi? What entity of state government is most competent to make decisions regarding public education funding? How should the state decide between competing claims for funding public programs? What is the difference between a statutory and a constitutional requirement to fund public education? We hope that today's discussion leaves you understanding better some of the recent legal and policy developments pertaining to public education funding, and that in the process, the conversation helps us all become better informed and more engaged citizens. With that end in mind, we have some extremely knowledgeable, experienced, and accomplished leaders with us here today. Representative John Moore is a 19-year veteran of the Mississippi House of Representatives and has been chair of the House Education Committee since 2012. An insurance agent and small business owner, Representative Moore represents District 60 in the House, which includes Rankin and Simpson counties. Ms. Patsy Broomfield, a longtime journalist, currently serves as communications director for 42 for Better Schools, an organization whose purpose is to promote the passage of Initiative 42, a statewide ballot initiative for the November 2015 elections that mandates the amendment of Section 201 of the Mississippi Constitution to require the state provide and the legislature to fund an adequate and efficient system of free public schools. I think I got all that right. You can correct us. Close enough. And finally, we have Governor Ronnie Musgrove, Mississippi's 29th Lieutenant Governor and 61st Governor, was considered by many to be Mississippi's education governor. Then Lieutenant Governor shepherded the passage of MAEP through the legislature in 1997, and Governor Musgrove is currently spearheading a lawsuit on behalf of a number of school districts in the state to recover funds that were supposed to have been appropriated in accordance with MAEP but never were. Now, before we get started, let me note that the panelists, to my knowledge, have not discussed with each other what they're going to say, and they haven't shared that with me anyway. But I think it's safe to assume that there will be some points of healthy disagreement, but I'm sure that will be expressed civilly. Right, panel? Okay. So I hope you are as excited as I am about the conversation ahead, and please join me in welcoming our panelists. And now I transition to a role of lightly moderating the conversation, and the emphasis on lightly. And so now we're going to hear a few minutes from each of our panelists. They're going to outline their experience, expertise as it relates to public education funding. Then we'll have a conversation amongst ourselves, and then we'll open the floor to audience Q&A. So that's the plan of attack. So without anything further.
Well, thank you. It's a delight to be here. Thank you to Millsaps, and thank you for all of you being here. This is a very timely and important subject, and I'm happy to be here representing Initiative 42. 18 years ago, my son and daughter were students at Brandon High School and sort of enjoying that little bubble world over there, and nobody really worrying about public education. They proceeded on to college and now are happy adults out there succeeding in the world, and we're proud for that. But 18 years ago also reminds us that that's when the Mississippi Adequate Education Program was passed by the legislature. And that was a promise written into law that said the state would put a financial floor, and the state would decide what that floor was to be adequate to fund all our school districts. Because back then they were pretty much dependent on what their local economies could afford, and in many places they couldn't afford much of anything. And so thanks to the legislature for having passed that, there is in the law the provision that financial support shall be provided. Now, if we look across those 18 years, we also know as a historical fact that MAEP has been fully funded by the legislature only 2 times, and those happen to have been in election years, which some would speculate is not a coincidence. We had a rough patch with the economy, and everybody understands that. But that's pretty much over, and I believe that most of us will acknowledge that. For the past 7 years, though, if we want to just kind of look into recent history after we've come out of that economic skid, the promise that the legislature made to the citizens and to their schools and to their children has been shortchanged by nearly $1.7 billion. That's a big number. And but what does that really look like? Let's get practical into some things that we can touch rather than talking about a big hunk of money that none of us will ever really understand how much that is. Nearly $1.7 billion is about 5,000 first-year teachers for 10 years. That is more than 17,000 school buses. It's nearly 17 million textbooks. It's 4,500 school counselors for 10 years. And it's nearly 6 million classroom computers. That's what that money could have been spent on. And that's what a state commitment to our schools can mean for the future. Now, what has happened is that you and I are now paying twice, in most instances, for our public schools. The state legislature decides, even though the law tells them they should fully fund it, they decide that they won't. And so they decide what they will. And you and I send our tax money to Jackson to support our schools, but it doesn't all come back. So then we turn to our cities and our counties and say, help. We don't have enough money here to just do what they're demanding that we do at the state and federal level. And so in the places where our cities and counties can afford to do a little more, they do. They try to bridge that gap. Consequently, our property taxes go up. And so we've sent it to Jackson, it's not come back, and our property taxes have been raised. Now, if that doesn't aggravate people, I don't know what does. So they've hit you twice, and you got less. I'm a journalist, but I can do that math. Okay, so that's the financial situation. And this is all because the legislature refuses to abide by the very law that it passed in 1997. I'm out there talking to civic groups and that kind of stuff, and folks come up to me and they say, why would anybody not want to fund our public schools? And I respond to them, I don't know. Ask them. But I've been thinking about that lately, quite obviously, and I think I have the answer. It is about power and control. It is about a few people at the top of our government deciding they want to make all the decisions for you and me, although we're paying for it, and they're just not letting go. So here we are, still at the bottom, fed up with it. We are still at the bottom, and they want to be the captains of the Titanic. It's that simple. Well, let's look at a couple of the whining insults that we hear about Initiative 42. One is that if we fully fund education, the rest of government will go to hell in a handbasket. That is simply not true. I would say that's a lie, but I'm too much of a lady to say that. They can afford to do this. In fact, they have the money to do it right now. Last year, you remember, they put the difference between sort of fund and MAP into the rainy day fund, and nobody objects to the rainy day fund being full because that's important in cases of emergency. What we have now here is an education emergency after 18 years of not being fully funded. And so we do actually have the money to fully fund MAP. What has happened, though, is that we've had some money just squandered. Kior, that's a plan proposed up in North Mississippi to turn wood chips into petroleum products. $75 million the state pumped into that. They're in bankruptcy court in Delaware right now. Are we going to see that money? I don't know. We all remember the beef plant, excuse me. $53 million. Those are just a couple of things, and that doesn't count the new cars people are driving around in and things like that. Okay. We also know that because we didn't have enough money, the leadership proposed massive tax cuts for business that ultimately would have resulted in the general fund being diminished by 1/3. Now, I believe that's when we wouldn't have been able to afford anything. Anyway, that's just me talking. So we do have the money to fully fund MAP, whether we choose to or not. And by the way, when did you and I get to pick and choose which laws that we abide by? I thought that they were just laws for everybody. Okay, let's go on to the other silliness here, and that is about this one judge in Hinds County is going to decide for everybody how much gets spent on our schools. Ooh. One judge. Well, that's ridiculous. Number one, that's the law that if you have a beef with state government, it goes to a judge in wherever state government lives. That happens to be Hinds County. But the truth is that any kind of a beef is going to wind up with the Mississippi Supreme Court. 9 judges elected by voters from all over this state. They're going to decide whether this issue stands or not. And they're also not going to tell the legislature how to fully fund MAP. They're going to tell them just to do it. The legislature's job is to appropriate money. That's a constitutional thing. Nobody's going to take that away from them. But if there's a constitutional amendment that exists that says you will fully fund MAEP, which is what 42 is about, they will have to do it. And that's kind of like tithing at church. You know, you have that dispute with yourself. Can I tithe? Can I afford to tithe? Oh, no. Well, when you do, I know from personal experience, the rest of my budget just fell into place. I don't think the state government is necessarily a holy mission, but I think the same applies. You set your priorities and the rest of the budget just falls into place. If our children and the economic future of this state are not a priority, I don't know what is. Let me just wrap up here by saying that this is about our kids. This is about their future. This is about our state's economic future. We are the Titanic. I refuse to sink. I refuse to sink. And that's why I'm in this, and that's why everybody else who signed those petitions, those 200,000 people signed those petitions because they want this on the ballot. That's why we're in it too. We're in it to take back the power that the legislature refuses to acknowledge. We are here to take back our power. I'm here for those 500,000 Mississippi children who go to public schools. 90% of Mississippi school children go to public schools. Legislators, and they've got parents and they've got grandparents and they've got towns that need them to succeed and counties that need them to succeed and a state that needs them to succeed. If you'll pardon the grandma, I'm in it for this little guy. 7-month-old James, and his parents pay taxes, and they expect to be able to send him to a public school that's got it together, that is fully financed because they pay their taxes. James, I love you, and I'm in it for James and all the other kids. So thank you. I hope you'll call us, and I'll sign up and volunteer today. Thank you.
Thanks. Thanks. Perfect. Governor Musgrove?
Thank you very much, and thank you, Millsaps, for allowing me to be here today. And Patsy, it's a pleasure to be with you, and Mr. Chairman, it's a pleasure to be with you as well. If you ever looked around in communities, have you ever sized a community up and determined, this is a really good community, I'd want to go there, I'd want to live there? If you have every good community that you describe as good, I will say, has a good public school. The same thing can be said about a state. If you want to go to a state, if you want to see the state prosper, you'll see that it has a good system of public schools. Education is aspirational for all of us, but it's also much more practical. It's about economic development. It's about the creation of jobs. It's about having an opportunity that will keep people in Mississippi and not have them go to other places. When we have invested in education, when we have made education a priority, we have seen the economy and the production of jobs in our state prosper. On the other hand, when we haven't done that, let's see what has happened. For the 7th straight year, the state has underfunded the Mississippi Adequate Education Program. Right now, we are virtually tied for the highest unemployment in the nation. In 2014, there were only 2 states in the nation that actually had a net loss of jobs, Alaska and Mississippi. Mississippi is currently 50th in the nation of personal income. We're 50th in the nation on health care. I can go on and on about those statistics, not because I'm proud of them, but because those are the results, in my opinion, of what happens when you fail to invest in education. And that's what's happened over the last 7 years. So how does this thing of education funding work? All of us understand that the Constitution takes precedence over the statutes. State government takes precedence over the cities, et cetera, as you go down. The Constitution, Section 201, actually provides the mandate to the legislature to fund education. It says simply that the legislature, acting on behalf of the state, shall, mandated in the Constitution, shall, by general law, provide for the establishment, maintenance, and support of free public schools subject to the limitations and conditions set out by the legislature. General law is important because that's not an appropriation bill, that's the general law. The Mississippi Adequate Education Program is the general law that funds schools. Before it was the Minimum Foundation Program. And for those of you who are educators in the room and been around for a while, that was our funding program from 1953 up until 1997 when the MAEP was put into place. It's also important to note that general law, the formula itself, takes precedence over appropriation bills. In fact, Section 69 of the Constitution says that the legislature cannot, through an appropriation bill, engraft, modify, or repeal a general law act. So by an appropriation bill, you cannot reduce, you cannot change, you cannot engraft the general law. And the general law is the MAEP funding formula. On behalf of the state, the legislature has the responsibility of setting the policy. The legislature has determined that education is of utmost priority in the state, and that is as it should be. And in fact, Section 37(1)(2) sets out a lot of other things about the importance of education. The legislature also sets out the requirements for each school, and they have set out that it is required of every public school in the state of Mississippi to meet a level C, what we used to call a level 3, but now like A, B, C, D, and F, at least a level C school. They then say, if you don't maintain a level C, we can in fact come in and provide help. If you do not continue to improve, we will then possibly take you over. The legislature then sets out the policy. What does it take to educate at a level C success? And that has been set out by the legislature for the state of Mississippi as being fully funding of the MAEP. In other words, the state has required a school district to be a level C, has said as a matter of fact that it takes funding at MAEP, full funding, to do that, and then says if you do not meet that requirement, we will potentially take you over as a school district. You require one thing and then do not provide the funding that you find in the statute as a matter of law that you need. There's something wrong about that. And that is what has taken place over the last 7 years. And I may simply say I was around when we actually wrote the MAEP. And so without going into a lot of depth and minutia and things that you all do not want to hear, let me just tell you in short what it does. Out of the, at the time, 152 school districts, I think it's now 146, Mr. Chairman, if I'm not mistaken. The 146 school districts come from all places across the state. Some have high property tax values where they are. Others have very low tax values. So the whole idea was to not make them all equal, but to at least raise the ones with property low value up to a level that they could meet the requirements, which is a level C. So some school districts get enough extra to provide that. No school district has money taken away from it. And so every time you underfund the Mississippi Adequate Education Program, the school districts in the rural, the ones that do not have a high property value, hurt and suffer disproportionately to school districts that do, because that was the whole idea of the MAEP to start with. And then the statute also then mandates that the legislature would do that. Now, I've heard people say across the state that, well, even though the statute says that we shall do that, we didn't really mean shall. Okay? And for those of you who are lawyers in the room, you know that the word shall has been defined by the Mississippi Supreme Court many, many, many times. And they, in essence, say it's the opposite of may. May is conditional, potential, maybe. Shall is mandatory. Now, why would you say that if it says shall and we said we shall do it, why do you then turn around and say, well, we really didn't mean that? April Fool, or whatever, and I'm being facetious on that, but why would you say that? I will point out that in 2007, right after that was passed, Governor Barber and Governor Bryant went across the state of Mississippi and told the people of the state of Mississippi, you will never have to worry about underfunding MAEP again. We have done so, we have made it mandatory, it will be funded from now on. But of course, with the prism of being able now to look back, we realize that has not been done. And for 7 straight years, it has not been funded. And then people have asked me, well, why a lawsuit? Why would you file a lawsuit to get the state to, in essence, follow the law? And people have said, well, why would you do that? Well, I might point out, if someone believes strong enough in doing something, Governor Bryant just sued the President of the United States, along with a number of other governors, when they did not believe the President had followed the dictates and demands of the Affordable Care Act. So it is something that they felt like they needed to do. I've looked historically back at Mississippi, and the reason that we filed the lawsuit is simply this. The legislature had an opportunity with the funds to fully fund and chose not to do so. So if you've got the money, you've got the funds, and you don't, then what's the incentive, the reason, the basis by which you would fund it? And then I thought back over our short history in Mississippi and realized with almost every major gain of education progress in Mississippi, it has taken a lawsuit. Ask the HBCUs of higher education. It's the Ayers lawsuit that had to be filed, went to the U.S. Supreme Court to get that decision. For those of 16th section land, where the schools were being underfunded, it took a lawsuit to make that happen. If you look at Brown versus Board of Education, to make sure that we provided equal access for education. When you look at the Chickasaw session for the 22 school districts in North Mississippi, it took a lawsuit to make that happen. It's not unusual sometimes to have a lawsuit because that's what the court is. It's there as an arbiter when we're not following the law. And that is simply why we filed the lawsuit, because we thought that it was that critical. Now let me close with this. How important is money in schools? People can be across the board on that. But let me give you a prime example of something that the legislature has just done, and it's now in the process right now. The legislature, and I think every person in the state of Mississippi would like to see and make sure that when a child graduates or finishes 3rd grade, they can read at 3rd grade level. I certainly want that to happen. Well, the legislature took a step to say they passed a 3rd grade gate that says if you don't, you can't go on to the 4th grade. Okay? And then used Florida as the example to say this has been very successful in Florida, and this is why we think we ought to do so, and it works. Let me give you the comparative difference. Florida has a Republican governor, Republican House, Republican Senate, much like we have here in Mississippi. Let me show you the difference between the two. In Mississippi, we do not have real pre-K. We've put $3 million into pre-K. Florida, on the other hand, has put over $1 billion into pre-K. Now, how important do you think it is in pre-K in learning to read by the time you're in the 3rd grade to have that benefit and have that help? Then secondly, when you don't fund the MAEP, one of the first things that go in the state, the teacher assistants, the reading assistants, the people who spend time helping children to read. Greenwood just laid off 25 teacher assistants. So in those schools that have had to lay off the teacher assistants, they even have less of an opportunity for the children to read. One may say that money really doesn't matter, but I would say you've got to have money to be able to do those things that are mandated. And that's why it's so important to have the MAEP fully funded. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Governor Musgrove. Representative Moore?
Thank you. So in conclusion, before I take off, and I'm glad to see the room is completely full. This is quite an honor to be here with these two distinguished guests here. But I want to recognize somebody in the room that I've had the pleasure, I guess, I don't know, punishment would be what it would call. As a former education chairman to my left here would tell you, this is a lot of work to be the chairman, but the gentleman that was my predecessor and who served very gallantly in Mississippi for 8 years is sitting over to my left, Representative Cecil Brown. I wish. And I just wanted to recognize him because I have a high degree of respect for him and the work that he did in the time there. Very quickly, I want to run through just a list of the things. And of course, the governor just sit here and condemned the 3rd grade reading gate, and all it does is it says that we just want our children to be able to read, because that's all right. But well, this is not about that. A few things that we've done legislatively and reforms in the last 4 years, and of course the current leadership has been in place since 2012. We passed a Charter School Act, which we'll have our first charter schools opening in in this fall, I believe, here in the city of Jackson, with the 3rd grade reading act, which is probably the linchpin of the reforms, and that's just to require our children to be able to read. MCOPS, which is a school safety vehicle that allows money to flow through to the local school districts in light of all the school shootings. The pre-kindergarten collaboratives, we started it the first time ever in Mississippi during this 4-year period of time, with the intentions this year in the budget of increasing the amount of funding, moving that up, and it got tangled up during the process. And I was very disappointed about that. Something that's been first in Mississippi history is a number of school consolidations. The taxpayers of the state of Mississippi will not tolerate failure anymore because of the competitive nature that we need our school children to be in out there. We've increased the qualifications for teachers a little bit and created more teacher scholarships to encourage young people to go into the field of education, and set aside scholarship money for people that have 28 or better on their ACT to have a free ride if they'll go into the field of education. The Student Religious Liberties Act, the first in Mississippi history, we created a dyslexia scholarship program. We've uncovered the fact that many educational experts have known for years and years, but they've chosen not to deal with it, that we had a huge dyslexia problem in Mississippi. So we attacked that in our reform and created some scholarship money, not only for the students to be able to access some help, but for our young adults to be able to go receive their specialist degree in that field. We had to make some changes in the New Start law, which is the law that allows the State Department of Education to actually go in and take over a district if it continually fails. This year, one of our accomplishments was to make sure that the department has the authority to be able to punish school districts who knowingly and willingly go out and cheat on the state test, which is absolutely fraud, and I think they should go to jail if they intentionally set up failure for those districts. We set up a standard review commission to look at the new, with all of the confusion over the new Common Core standards, which I don't even like the way that sounds, but it's Mississippi's College and Career Ready Standards is what it is. We set up a commission. The governor has not signed that bill yet, but we hope that it will be done. So we can look at it very quickly and see if the standards are truly what Mississippi needs. And this will be a panel of teachers. The next thing that we've done is we have doubled the amount of money that the school teachers in the state of Mississippi actually receive in their hands in the form of supplies. And we've done that. I know when we came in 4 years ago, statewide they were receiving $6 million, and in this last budget it was $12 million. And there was actually a move at certain times in the past to take that money completely out of the budget and put it into MAEP, put it into the formula. We created, which was an efficiency idea. It was a government efficiency committee came up with the idea was allowing school teachers to use a debit card with this supply money, saved an enormous amount of administration money for the local school districts. And the former governor mentioned it earlier, we switched from our ranking, just the letter ranking and how we rank our schools from a very confused, we had star and high performing. It's changed down through the years several times, but we decided to go with A, B, C, D, and F, and that's, everybody understands if you have an A school district. And last but not least, and very proudly, I'll stand here and tell you, we passed a special needs voucher bill, and it became law yesterday. And I'm excited to see that happen. And it's another one of the vehicles that we have to help those that need help out there. Okay, with that in line, I just want everybody to know that this term of the legislature has not been sitting there doing nothing. We've it's been hard working 4 years. Give you a little bit of economic history, and I understand, that nobody in this room can sit here and tell me that they don't want to fully fund education. Well, I'll sit here and tell you I want to fully fund education too, and I think it's a wonderful goal for us to have, and we need to be constantly pushing in that direction. I happen to be part of the budget committee, which is. I'm chairman of education. I'm on the appropriations committee and happen to be on the joint budget committee. But I think all the time that we don't control a lot of the economic stuff that influences our budget here in Mississippi. In the year 2000, and Governor Musgrove was the governor, we passed a 5-year teacher pay raise. And immediately thereafter, we had the dot-com bust. All of the older ones in here will remember the stock market completely collapsed. All of the major companies that were involved in the internet industry collapsed. Mississippi lost one of the largest companies in the world. WorldCom collapsed out from under the stock market, and the economy actually went backwards. Mississippi's revenue stream went backwards. Well, it took 2 or 3 years to recover from that. Well, it was digging a hole in Mississippi for the next 2 or 3 years because we had this obligation to the teachers and we were going to fund it. Well, then the next little event that happened that actually threw a cog in the wheels of the economy in Mississippi was a little windstorm down on the Gulf Coast caused Hurricane Katrina that took the economy backwards for a period of time. Just the entire state from Hattiesburg south was shut down. There was nothing happening down there. Complete loss of infrastructure on the Mississippi Gulf Coast. And each one of us, we lived through that time, and we know what it did to our neighborhoods and to the state. just the loss of economic engine at that point in time. Well, we made our fight in Mississippi. We fought back. Well, the next thing that happened to us was what? 2008, I believe we had a stock market collapse. Fuel prices went to $4 a gallon. People couldn't pay their home mortgage, whatever was the root cause of that situation. And all of a sudden we go into economic collapse again. Stock market just falls completely off of the shelf. And once again, Mississippi's budget drops like a lead weight. Well, at that time, the former chairman was here. He was the man driving the train. And there's never been a man in the world any more passionate about funding education than Cecil Brown has been. But you can't fund it if you don't have any money. And we went through a period of time when we were sitting there, and the big discussion of the day was how many state employees would have to be laid off. And when you're actually looking at a budget being sliding backwards every day, you're fighting to preserve teachers in the classroom. You're trying to keep from laying off highway patrols. And it's been a very slow gain. So, usually an economic recovery after a stock market will happen just a couple of years. But this one has gone on since 2007, 8. It just happened in 2007 is when that law was changed. And the former chairman would have been the man. It was in the committee, when it was actually changed from may fund to shall fund. And then we immediately the next year went into economic collapse. Thank goodness at that point in time, the state of Mississippi had a full rainy day fund. And what it did, that extra $100 million that was pushed out of the savings account into our revenue stream every year, literally kept us from laying off that many people, because the numbers had already been calculated. We were looking at ways to allow agencies to cut salaries in lieu of laying them off. Well, if that wasn't enough, and I see none of this was our fault. None of us did this, did we? But it sure affects the ability of the state of Mississippi to do a lot of things. The next thing that happened was a little oil spill down on the Gulf Coast again. I believe that happened in 2010. They called the BP the Deepwater Horizon blew out down there. And it essentially shut the Gulf Coast area down again as they were trying to rebuild from Katrina loss. Moving on forward to today's date, in addition to these that affected the entire state of Mississippi, there's very few areas of the state that hadn't had a region that was severely damaged and slowed down by by tornadoes. And we can all think of situations where there's been neighbors and friends of ours killed. Well, 4 years ago, we started this term with a $550 million negative budget. We were actually spending $550 million more than we had coming in. So we were still overspending by $500 million. And there was no money in the rainy day fund. We were gone to nothing. Thank goodness the economy just flattened out and it started perking back up, just bumping up just a little bit, trying to start back up. Now that was from 2008 to 2012. The prior year, before the current leadership took over, the year before, the education funding was cut. The budget was cut $300 million. And they didn't go in there and laugh and decide they wanted to do it. It was absolute necessity. It had to be done. Because every other agency of government had been cut to the bone. We were actually parking highway patrol cars. So when we took over 4 years ago, the new administration was blamed with this $300 million underfunding of education. which happened to be just the right figure that the formula was down. Well, we had to start. We were new in leadership. We established a new set, our new priorities for the direction we wanted to go. The governor, the lieutenant governor, the Speaker of the House, and the various chairmen around the building. We all had our priorities, but the number one priority was to regain our budgetary balance and to refill that rainy day fund. As the economy started perking back up, we had to put money back aside again, just in case, because we're used to something happening every 3 or 4 years. But we wanted to get the budget, but we wanted to get the one-time money out of the budget and bring it into structural balance. So every year when we walk in there, the amount of money that comes in is the amount of money that we appropriate. Our education funding priority was to elevate funds as much as the taxpayers could stand, while also maintaining the stable operation of other government functions. So every year when it came time, when we looked at just how little bit of money was new money coming into the system, the education was the only department that received basically any of that, because there was no growth. If you have $1 of revenue last year and $1 of revenue this year, there's not any way to buy anything new with the new revenue. But we had committed, our leadership team committed to as soon as humanly possible and as economically possible, we would push education funding higher. We wanted to go higher than it had ever been before. We set out also at the same time to begin focusing our resources to the classroom, to the teacher, and to demand performance from our school districts, and that we were no longer tolerate failure. And as I mentioned earlier, we collapsed 6 districts in the last 4 years. We will not tolerate it. It costs the taxpayers too much money to educate our children out there now. At the same time, while this is going on, and I'm running just a minute or two long here, at the same time, while education is needing and craving money, the big gorilla in the room, Medicaid, is gobbling it all up. At the same time, Medicaid is continuing to consume, and it's a necessary program. We have to have it. And all that spending is mandated by the federal government. At the same time, Medicaid is continuing to consume the entire state budget. I can tell you this, in 2009, which is right after the collapse, if you will, in the economy, Medicaid's budget was $500 million, and this year it's $1 billion. That's the state's part of it. And it's all mandatory. We have to do it. So there's no, and this is federal. If we don't put the money in there, then the federal just stops paying us. The last 4 years, we've had stable but slow economic growth, but with frugal budgeting, we've had once again brought stability and balance to our budget, and we've reloaded the rainy day fund for future budget stability. Over the past 4 years, we've increased the funding in education by over $200 million in the formula alone, and much more than that in areas that go to the classroom that are outside the formula. And because I've used a little bit too much time, I wanted to say the figures. This year, the amount of money that was required for total funding is $2.46 billion, and the amount of money that the 2016 budget actually allocates is $2.5 billion. So it's actually a $40 million over what that full funding calls for. So with that, I'm through.
Thank you, Chairman.
And that does not include the $800 million of federal money and the, I guess, almost $3 billion of local tax money. So it's almost $9,000 per student in Mississippi. And I want to thank y'all for listening. I appreciate it very much.
Thank you, Chairman.
And I apologize because I do need to go. I'm sitting up here kind of hurting real bad. I blew out a disc the last Monday of of a session, and I've got to be at Baptist Hospital in 15 minutes. So thank y'all for allowing me to be here. And Governor, you can talk bad as you want to now. Cecil's going to take care of me.
Good to see you. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. So we've got a lot, I think that a lot of different directions we can take this conversation. I've got a few questions I'd be happy to pose, but I see both of you have been taking notes as you've listening to each other and listening to Chairman Moore. What do y'all think would be the most productive direction to take this conversation?
Well, I'm sorry to say that we're going to have to act like John Daly here and talk to the empty chair. I don't know if I feel like crying or if I feel like Pharaoh after the 10 plagues of Egypt or whatever it was, after Representative Moore was little presentation there. It was so sad. But I wanted to ask him, and I guess it's sort of rhetorical at this point, but last night I was over at James's house, and I was giving him a bath, and he was kicking in the tub, and he said to me, Nana, if you see Representative Moore tomorrow,
He's a very precocious child.
Well, talking comes natural in our family. He said, if you see Representative Moore tomorrow, would you please, I know he's going to give us a sad story about money, but would you ask him if the leadership, while they don't have any money now, if they have a plan to get there to fully fund MAEP, just a plan. Representative Moore? Oh, James, I'm sorry.
Governor, what's on your mind after hearing everybody speak? And then we'll open the floor to audience questions here pretty soon.
First of all, let me say that anyone who serves as chair of an education committee deserves to be commended for the hard work that you have to do. And so while I may appreciate, respect, and really like John Moore, I disagree with him. And I think in today's debate, that's what you are supposed to be able to do, respectfully. So I will respectfully counter with a number of things that he said. First of all, following the tragic Katrina event that he described devastated our economy, and it was a terrible event. If you'll look at the post years, our economy, our income grew by over 12% because of all of the money that was brought into the state. Federal money. Federal money. But I'm not even talking about the federal money that also filled the rainy day fund, which was the ARA money, the stimulus money that was given to the state. That's how we actually filled the rainy day fund. Okay. If you look at the budget on the day or the end of the year that I left office in 2004, the state budget was somewhere between $3.7 and $3.8 billion, the state share. Today, if you've read the paper, the budget that was just adopted for next year is $6.289 billion. Now, I'm not a rocket scientist, but according to my calculation, that is a substantial increase of money into our budget. And while Chairman Moore does say we have had some difficult times, I will also say that the money has increased dramatically. That we have had. So that is a factual matter as well. Also, in terms of there being a mandate on Medicaid, actually it's the state who decides what the levels are or the qualifying people who receive Medicaid. So if in fact the state disagrees with how much money they're spending, the state always has the option to change those. I'm not recommending to do that, but that is a state decision, not a mandate from the federal government. Now, once you make the decision, it then is a federal mandate that comes after that. Now, having said all of that, let's come back to what the real deal is, because we really didn't talk much about MAEP and the requirement. I think what I have heard by reading in the papers, by listening to what has been said by the legislative leadership over the last several months, they are proud of the fact that they balanced the budget. They have been able to balance the budget by simply not paying some of the bills. Now, if you let me balance my personal budget by throwing some of my bills in the trash can, I can make my checkbook look good every month. And that is exactly what they've done. The law mandates it. It is a shall, and at the same time, they just chose not to do so. And from a philosophical standpoint, and where I've always been, is that when you put more money into education, when you improve education, when you have better educated citizens, you will reduce the number of people who are receiving Medicaid, because you will increase the economic opportunity and the job opportunity. And for those of you who would have felt like my wife, if my wife had been sitting in this room a minute ago when I pulled out my phone, she would have just gasped at my disrespect for pulling out my phone in a public arena. I was not pulling it out to use the phone. I pulled it out to get to the calculator, because I just heard that what had been done is that the legislature had increased the school supply money of the teachers from $6 million to $12 million. Did I hear that correctly? Okay. So it was a great increase for teachers in the classroom. I pulled my calculator out to calculate what it was when we actually passed it and what we were funding it prior to 2004. It was $18 million is what we had funded it. So they had cut it from $18 million down to $6 million, and now they've just increased it back up to $12 million. So let's deal with the facts as the facts are. And again, it's not because someone is good, bad, or indifferent. It's where the priorities are. And I just happen to believe that the priorities of the state should be and is best accomplished, and the benefits by the state are best when we fully fund our public schools and demand of them in joint partnership that we can provide the best we can for our children. It's not an us versus them. We're all together. And we want to make that happen. So that's just to take Kenneth. Now, with that, I'll stop.
Well, yeah, and we'll take some questions, but let me just put in a plug here to say, it is clear that this legislature is never going to fully fund our public schools. Never. And the only way that will hold up legally to require that to happen is a constitutional amendment. Of course, they've muddied the water with this alternative, and anything that's got a letter by it, you don't want to vote for it. But this constitutional amendment, which is much stronger than the statute that they already ignore. So that's what 42 is in the business to do, is to make this so strong that they cannot turn away, as they have for the last 7 years. So you can make that 18 if you want to, but Ronnie's right, 7 years, $1.7 billion. So questions, people?
Yeah, so I'm thrilled to see a pretty much full house, and I know you have come with questions, and others have probably arisen as you've heard our panelists speak. So we've got about 12 minutes or so, according to my watch, before 1:45 hits us. So we've got 2 microphones, so I do encourage you to go to a microphone, if at all possible, so that we can hear your questions for the recording. So questions? We've got one here.
Good afternoon.
I knew you weren't going to let it go.
Governor, I hate that the chairman had to leave as well. One of the things that keeps churning in my mind is that we are talking about a level C school in 1992? 97. So in today's world, what do you think we would be talking about? And I mean, a level C school in 1997 that has been underfunded, for all of this time, and we're living in a 21st century world. I'd like for you all to respond to even the fight for MAEP, and we have to do that. Where does that leave us globally?
Let me say this. The question was posited as though the figure was locked in 97, and hence, if you look at time and the increase in cost of living index, then it would probably be more. Let me say there is kind of a cost of living index within the formula that is recalculated. So in looking at the formula, I would not argue if they would simply fully fund the formula, that's staying close enough with the cost of living increase in the index. But let me say this much. This is not a Cadillac formula. This is not a Mercedes-Benz formula. This is a simple, straightforward, good formula to make sure we get everything done. And that's why it's so important. When you have set out that this is what's required to fund schools, and then you won't do that to meet the requirement, that's what is a real travesty for so many schools out there. Some schools will be able to make it in spite of the loss of the funding because they have such a good local tax base. But most of our school districts do not fall into that situation. And our objective should not be to fully fund and have 10 good public schools in Mississippi, because that is the net effect of the failure to fully fund.
Thank you.
Sure.
I have a question regarding the budget. I heard the chairman say that we had many financial disasters that contributed towards the underfunding. The question I have is, why is the tax structure such that our wealthiest people are not paying more so that we have a little more robust budget that cannot be destroyed each and every year by a downturn in the economy or a natural disaster or something like that? It seems like we are just barely scraping by, and that just is a formula for failure. I mean, why aren't the wealthiest among us contributing more so that we then have a robust budget?
That's a political question that deserves a political answer. And that's not what Initiative 42 really is focused on. I know what you're saying, and anybody who wants to open that can of worms on the tax code, Cecil Brown can tell you they're just whistling into the wind, to be nice about it. That is a discussion that should occur, but the discussion at this point is, what are we going to do about our schools? Because if the schools don't get better and we don't have more children who are qualified for good jobs, they will not come. The Toyotas and Nissans and everybody else they're not coming in here. If you saw the story in Forbes recently that said Mississippi, the worst state in the nation, Lord have mercy. It will take MDA millions of dollars to try to overcome that. They can't overcome it. It's true. And part of that is because of quality of life and the state's failure to invest in education. This is Forbes magazine saying this. This is not Patsy Broomfield, although I agree. But when they say this is not going to be a prosperous place, it's because we are not providing employers with enough well-trained people. The poster boy for entrepreneurship in the state of Mississippi, Hartley Peavy in Meridian, known all over the world for his sound equipment, said last fall he was having to close a plant because he couldn't get enough well-trained people. Well, what is wrong with that? That's because we are not educating our children at a high enough rate 39 out of 100 ninth graders today will not graduate high school. The experts say the South will not advance until we have more people out of college. Folks, we can't even get them out of high school. We got to get them out of high school so they can go to college, so we can get those good jobs. But it doesn't happen unless we support those schools. And the only way our schools are going to get funded, commercial, is Initiative 42. That's a fact check. Ma'am.
Excuse me, Kathy Sykes. I have a question about Initiative 42. Okay, I know that there's an alternative initiative that's going to be on the ballot also. If Initiative 42 passes, can the legislature come back next session and then change the Constitution to make it different?
No, they'd have to put another issue on a ballot. They can't just change the Constitution. People have to vote on the Constitution, I believe.
Okay, and then okay, so what if there's enough confusion and 42 fails? Then where are we?
That is exactly what 42A is about, is to confuse voters to such a degree that they go, oh man, I don't want to deal with this. I'm out of here. So that's what 42A is about. It is nothing but to maintain the status quo so the legislature keeps complete control over the education budget. Well, how good are we doing with that now, people? So, I call that the political dirty trick. This is what the ballot would have looked like if we had just had 42. Vote it up or down, I say to people. If you don't like it, vote no. Vote it up or down. We don't exactly know what the ballot's going to look like, but here's what we think it's going to look like with those two issues on there. So our challenge is to tell people, if it's got a letter by its name, don't vote for it. Vote for 42. 42 for better schools. That's what it is. We can afford to do it. We can't afford not to do it. So that's my other commercial.
As we're starting to run low on time, if others have questions, feel
Yeah,
free to
please.
move forward because we do have a few minutes. But I'd be interested to hear maybe just a little bit about how you feel about each other's efforts. Do you feel like the lawsuit is, at the end of the day, even though it's not the same thing that you're doing, that you feel good about it and optimistic about what it can accomplish? And likewise, Governor, do you feel like 42 is a good step, even though it's a different one from what you're taking? Or do you feel like in some ways they come into tension with each other? I'd be curious just to hear a little bit about how you feel about one another's efforts.
Go ahead.
Both of them work hand in hand in the sense that what they're doing is that they're placing education funding at a priority. Let's say that there's enough confusion and that the initiative fails. Okay. If the judge agrees with our legal position, and I believe our legal position is correct, that there is a mandate by the Constitution, there's a mandate by the statute that they need to fulfill that, then you have the MAEP fully funded going forward. Now, the legislature can always change the funding formula. They're there to do that. If they want to. They can always increase it if they want to. But at least we will have a debate in the public arena, and instead of not changing it, they've just simply chosen not to fund it, which I believe is a violation of Section 69 Constitution. On the other hand, if we have the MAEP in place and the judge rules in our favor and the constitutional amendment passes, then it just simply strengthens everything moving forward. That you've got a mandate to adequately and efficiently fund. It takes away some of the discretion, I would say conditions and limitations portion of Section 201 of the Constitution, so they work hand in hand. On the other hand, if for some reason the judge disagreed with us in our case, and the constitutional amendment passes, then you still have an opportunity to move forward. So I view them as working hand in hand with each other. One doesn't take away from the other.
No, and we want to get to the same place. We are really not affiliated in any way, and we've had our kind of tension early. But in the end, we just want our schools to get what they need. We completely agree on that, and so we're just hoping that the best comes. But we know that with that election in November, people are sick of not being heard. They are fed up with being 50th, and they've got a chance to do something about it for once. So I am grateful for this initiative law that was passed in 1993, which interestingly Governor Bryant actually voted for when he was in the House. So we thank him for that support. And we hope that everybody else will look at that way too, because it is the only and last opportunity we have to make this important change.
Great. Well, I think that means we're about out of time, according to my watch here. So let's thank our panelists, y'all. This was a great conversation.
Thank James.
Yeah. Again, we're glad that all of you were able to join us today for this important conversation on this timely topic. We hope that you'll keep an eye out for future programs here at Millsaps. And again, thank you so much to our panelists for being here. And hope all of y'all have a good weekend. Thanks.
Thank you.